Hello and thank you for viewing my video. I'll be introducing the African Science Index. My name is Rene Beattie. I'm a data scientist with African Science and I've helped in the development of this index. So in this lecture what we'll be doing is we will first of all be going through and looking at what the African Science Index is. Then we'll be taking a trip through how we calculate that index and using that information to kind of try and understand what the index means. And then finally we'll look at its partner, the African Science Badge, which summarizes the factors that led into the final index and helps us gain more insight into that country's position. So first of all, the African Science Index is an attempt to kind of summarize the scientific endeavor across the entire continent of Africa to kind of help see which countries are doing really well and which ones have room for improvement. Now, the African Science Index captures a number of different factors and it balances the contribution of a number of different types of information. First of all, we've a number of factors that summarize the basic infrastructure of the country that provides a good foundation for scientific endeavor. So this will be the Education Index, Literacy Rate and Human Development Index. Next, we include a number of factors that kind of give us the academic efficiency. So it's a number of publications that are published against the number of academic institutes within the country, the number of people living in the country, the total economic output of the country, and the total amount of external debt that that country holds. And finally, we also include the H index as a recognized measure of the impact of the academic output of that country. So the H index was the number of publications from that source that have achieved at least that number of citations. So say for example you have an H index of 100 means that that country would be producing 100 papers that have attracted 100 citations or more. So how we calculate it is we start off with these raw values from each of these factors. They span all sorts of different ranges, completely impossible to directly compare them, and the highest values are typically multiples of the lowest values. So the first thing we do is we take the values and convert them to their magnitudes. We use this, we take the log 10, and so 1 unit in a log 10 just tells us how many orders of magnitude bigger it is. We then take this and we ratio this magnitude to the total variation in terms of magnitude across the African continent. Specifically, we use 2 standard deviations. This means now that we have all of our completely different factors put on a standardized scale. So we then take the mean of these standardized factors and then add 1 so that they're centered around a value of 1. The first thing to understand about the African Science Index is that 1 unit of change in the African Science Index is 2 orders of magnitude, and that's equivalent to multiplying by 100. So if we have a value of 1.68, that means it's 0.68 units above average, which is about 1.4 orders of magnitude. On the other hand, in the bottom right, we have an index of 0.28, and this is 0.72 below average. So quite similar distance from average, but in the opposite direction. And it means that it's 1.4 orders of magnitude below average. So first of all, we see that the relative scale on each side of average is the same, whether it's above or whether it's below 1. And if we have an average of 1, it means we're close to the African average. Now, obviously you might want to understand what this means in a more concrete way, and it's possible to transform any combination scores or comparing the score to any net value into a meaningful number. So we can take the index we're interested in, subtract off what we're comparing it to. So if we're comparing it to average, we just simply subtract off 1. We multiply that result by 2, and then we raise 10 to the power of that result, and that will give us the multiplication factor. So an index of 1.68 is about 1.4 standard deviations above average, and that represents 25 times multiplication. So this country is 25 times larger than the African average. Whereas in the bottom right, we see it's approximately 1/25 of the African average. Now I will introduce you to the African Science Badge, which gives us a colourful way of summarising how that final index was actually reached. Different countries will reach similar scores using a different contribution from a range of factors. So there's quite a lot packed into this little badge, so we'll take a little bit of time just to unpack it. First of all, we can see there's a number of colourful wedges and segments. These represent each of the factors that we've used to calculate the index, and each segment is named clearly, so it might not be clear in this video, but when you view it online, it'll be very easy to read. Behind these we have a grey circle that indicates the African average. So if we see a segment that extends beyond this grey circle, it means that that particular factor is above the African average. If we see a factor that has a segment shorter than the grey circle, it means then that that factor is below the African average. Here we have a page of all of the African Science Badges for all of the African countries. And when we start to compare them, we can start to see some patterns popping out. One which I just thought highlight as of interest, we see quite a few countries that have very strong orange segments. So the orange segment is representing the number of publications per head of population, per capita. And what is interesting is that these are very consistently associated with a well-balanced socio-educational profile. Not all well-balanced socio-education profiles are associated with a strong number of publications per head of population, but those that do are consistently well placed in terms of social and educational profile. We'll look at some individual badges now, and here we see the top ranked country, South Africa. The main contributors to its index are a very strong H index and a strong number of publications per head of the population. It also does have a robust social and educational profile. If we go to the other end of the scale now and look at Somalia, ranked bottom, it's quite a bit behind the other countries. It's a very poor social education profile and very poor efficiency for academic output. But its H index is a number of places above bottom at 50th. Now this is not surprising because Somalia has a lot of political and social problems, so it's not surprising that science is not a very high priority at the moment for that country. But this got me wondering about another country. When I first started choosing science as my career while I was still at school and becoming interested, one African country that was very much in the news at that time because of the civil war was Rwanda. And when you look at Rwanda today, it's now ranked 16th across the continent of Africa, with a very well-balanced socio-educational profile and a very strong performance in terms of the number of publications against gross domestic product. So it's very encouraging to see that very strong progress can be made in a relatively short space of time when the country gets itself in a strong position. And finally, another interesting badge is that of the world's youngest country, South Sudan. So currently, being so young, it's not surprisingly ranked pretty low, second last. But what's intriguing about this badge is wondering what the future will hold as the country matures and develops and all the institutions required become mature. What kind of progress will we start seeing in this country? And finally, what I'd like to leave you with after this is just a quote from one of my colleagues at African Science, which captures what I see as the point of the African Science and its index and badges. it's to celebrate and raise the profile of what's going well in African science and help the world to realise that there's a lot of good coming out of that continent. And also, as we've done with Rwanda, starting to see how much progress is possible and how much has already been made. But then starting to understand what factors are contributing to different outcomes will help us to understand what the common challenges are that are faced across the continent. Hopefully it can help join the discussion in what the solutions might be to help and kind of promote even faster progress in the future. But I hope you've found this insightful, and hopefully you'll enjoy exploring the African Science Index and the associated badges on the website and start to see some interesting insights yourselves. And all the best. Thank you.